Sarah's eyes sparkled as she held little Adam for the first time. He was everything she had ever dreamed of: soft brown hair, deep green eyes, and a shy smile that seemed to promise a future full of love and connection. After years of frustrating attempts to have a biological child, Sarah and Mark had decided to adopt. The moment the social worker brought Adam into the orphanage's visiting room, something about the child made Sarah feel that he was meant to be theirs. Mark, on the other hand, took a more pragmatic stance. A rational man and a lawyer devoted to facts and evidence, Mark had hesitated when Sarah first suggested adoption, but when he met Adam, even he felt something unusual. Still, Mark remained cautious. "A 7-year-old carries stories we don't know," he warned as they drove home with Adam in the back seat. Adam's arrival turned Sarah and Mark's quiet home into something alive again. He was curious, polite, and seemed to observe the world around him with an uncommon maturity for his age. Sarah devoted herself to creating a loving routine, reading bedtime stories, cooking his favorite meals, and taking him on park outings. Mark, however, struggled with an unease he couldn't quite explain. The first few weeks went by peacefully until one night when everything changed. Mark decided it was time to give Adam a bath, a simple moment that would reveal something that would alter their lives forever. The shower water ran softly as Mark tested the temperature, ensuring it wasn't too hot. Adam sat on the edge of the tub, watching silently with his characteristic curious yet distant gaze. Sarah was in the living room folding laundry, listening to Adam's laughter echo from the bathroom. Mark helped the boy into the tub and began to wash his hair with gentle motions. At first, it was just another routine task, until, as Mark passed the sponge over Adam's back, he froze. His eyes widened, and his hands began to tremble. He quickly wiped away the water to confirm what he was seeing. It was a mark, not a common scar or birthmark. It was something intricate, like a symbol, 3 concentric circles interconnected by fine lines, etched deeply into the skin, as if crafted by a meticulous artist. The mark seemed to pulse under the dim bathroom light, almost alive. Mark instinctively stepped back, letting the sponge fall to the floor. "Sarah!" he shouted, his voice reverberating through the house. Sarah ran to the bathroom, confused and alarmed. "What happened?" she asked, seeing her husband's pale face. Look at this," Mark said, pointing to Adam's back. Sarah hesitated but moved closer, crouching down to get a better look. As her eyes registered the mark, she recoiled, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Mark, what is that? How is this possible?" Adam, who had been playing with the bath bubbles until then, looked up at them with an innocent smile. "You don't need to worry. It's just my mark. Everyone where I come from has one." His response made time seem to stop. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances, struggling to process what they had just heard. "Where you come from? What do you mean, Adam?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Adam simply shrugged. "You wouldn't understand yet." In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed drastically. Sarah, ever the optimist, tried to rationalize what she had seen. Perhaps it was some sort of cultural marking or even a scar from the orphanage, she thought. Mark, however, plunged into a frantic search for answers. He took photos of the mark and scoured obscure websites, trying to uncover its meaning. The deeper he dug, the more questions arose. One night, Mark stumbled upon something disturbing. He found a website dedicated to strange cases involving adopted children. There were accounts of similar marks, often tied to inexplicable events. Connections to the occult, some claimed. Cursed symbols, others warned. Mark wanted to dismiss these theories as conspiracies, but couldn't ignore how the stories aligned with Adam's behavior. Meanwhile, Adam continued to act as if nothing were wrong. He seemed oblivious to the growing tension in the house. But Sarah began noticing little things. Sometimes Adam seemed to know things she had never told him. He described dreams that coincided with events in Sarah and Mark's lives, as though he were reading their minds. One afternoon, Sarah found a drawing Adam had made while she was preparing dinner. It was a detailed picture of their home, but with one unsettling detail: Dark figures stood in the windows as if watching from outside. When Sarah asked him about it, Adam smiled and said, "They just want to make sure I'm safe." The tension in the house reached a breaking point when Mark decided to confront Sarah. "I don't think this is normal, Sarah. This child, he's not like other kids. It's not just the Mark, it's the way he acts, how he knows things he shouldn't." "Mark, stop it!" Sarah shouted, tears in her eyes. "You're letting your paranoia take over. He's just a boy who's been through things we don't understand yet. He needs love, not suspicion." Deep down, Sarah couldn't ignore the weight of doubt. The Mark, the dreams, the drawings, everything seemed to point towards something she wasn't ready to admit. Sarah and Mark began living in parallel worlds under the same roof. Mark immersed himself in his investigations, growing increasingly convinced that something was wrong with Adam. He started avoiding direct interaction with the boy, reducing their exchanges to the bare minimum. Meanwhile, Sarah worked hard to preserve the bond she had built with Adam, trying to compensate for Mark's growing distance. One night, while Sarah was asleep, Mark went down to his office with a plan. He had decided to send the photos of the Mark to a specialist in symbology he had met on an online forum about unexplained phenomena. "It might just be a coincidence, but I've seen something like this before," the specialist had written during one of their conversations. Mark attached the images and wrote a detailed email describing the strange events surrounding Adam. However, just as he was about to hit send, a sound in the hallway caught his attention. Looking toward the slightly ajar door, he saw Adam standing silently in the doorway, watching him with those green eyes that now seemed deeper and more intense than ever. "What are you doing, Mark?" Adam asked, his voice unnervingly calm for the situation. I'm just working," Mark replied, feeling a chill run down his spine. Adam gave a faint smile, but there was something unsettling about it. "You won't find what you're looking for. It's better to stop now." Mark was rendered speechless, the weight of the moment leaving him frozen in place. Adam turned and walked back to his room without saying another word. After a long moment of hesitation, Mark decided to send the email anyway, ignoring the boy's warning. The next morning, Sarah noticed Mark seemed even more distant. He barely spoke and looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept. Meanwhile, Adam was more cheerful than ever, running around the house and drawing incessantly on the sheets of paper Sarah had given him. She thought about confronting Mark about his behavior, but decided to wait until the evening. As the sun began to set, Mark received a reply from the specialist. The email contained an attachment with images and texts, accompanied by a short message. "The symbol you sent is known as the Mark of the Link. It appears in ancient texts connected to sects that believed in children chosen to act as messengers between worlds. There's little concrete evidence, but there are accounts suggesting these children are not entirely human. I'll dig for more information, but be careful. This isn't something to take lightly." Mark felt the weight of those words as he read and reread the email. He knew he had to tell Sarah, but how? She was already at her breaking point, and he feared this revelation might shatter the fragile balance they still had. Later that night, Mark decided he couldn't wait any longer. He found Sarah in the kitchen and began to speak. "I found something about Adam, something that might explain all of this." Sarah crossed her arms, already weary of Mark's suspicions. "What now, Mark? Another ridiculous theory to justify your inability to connect with him?" "It's serious, Sarah. The mark on his back, it has meaning. It's not just a scar or a coincidence. It's called the Mark of the Link. Ancient texts mention children like him. They believed these children served as bridges between worlds." Sarah laughed incredulously. "Bridges between worlds? Are you seriously telling me our son is some kind of supernatural being? Do you hear how insane that sounds, Mark?" "You don't understand because you don't want to see it, Sarah. He knows things he shouldn't know. He told me, in no uncertain terms, to stop investigating. How could he even know what I was doing?" Before Sarah could respond, a loud crash came from the living room. They both rushed in and found Adam standing in the middle of the room. Sheets of paper he had drawn on were scattered across the floor, each one depicting the same unsettling image. Their house, surrounded by dark, shadowy figures. "I tried to warn you," Adam said, his voice calm, but carrying an almost inhuman weight. "They're coming!" The lights began to flicker, and a cold wind swept through the room, despite all the windows being shut. Sarah pulled Adam close, holding him tightly. Mark, meanwhile, stood frozen, his eyes locked on the boy. Adam looked up at Sarah with tenderness. "I never wanted to hurt you, but now we don't have a choice. They need to take me back." "Back? To where?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "To my home," Adam replied, pointing toward one of the windows. Outside, tall, distorted silhouettes began to form, their figures swaying under the moonlight. The living room became a battlefield of emotions. Sarah, clutching Adam in her arms, stared at the shadowy figures closing in on the house. Mark remained frozen, torn between the instinct to protect his family and the growing certainty that they were dealing with something beyond human comprehension. Adam, small and seemingly defenseless, didn't appear afraid. He watched the shadows with a serenity that starkly contrasted with his parents' mounting terror. "They don't want to hurt you," he said, "but if you don't let me go, they'll come inside." "Let you go? You're our son!" Sarah screamed, clutching him tightly against her chest. "I don't know what's happening, but I won't lose you." Mark finally stepped closer to his wife and the boy. "Sarah, what if he's right? What if keeping him here puts us all in danger? Maybe he's not exactly what we think he is." "Do you hear yourself? He's just a child," Sarah shot back, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. Yet deep down, even she felt something was irreparably wrong. Outside the house, shadows stirred unnervingly, as if alive. An invisible pressure began to build inside, making it hard to breathe. The window panes cracked, and the clock on the wall stopped at midnight. Suddenly, one of Adam's drawings on the floor began to shift, as if coming to life. Mark, fighting his fear, picked up the paper and watched in horror. As the figures sketched on it seemed to move closer to the house. He threw the paper away and turned to Adam, increasingly convinced that the only way to stop this was to understand where the boy had come from. "Adam, you have to tell us the truth. Who are they? What do you mean, they want you back?" Mark demanded, his voice sharp but desperate. Adam sighed, sounding far older than he looked. "I don't remember everything, but I know I'm not like you. I was born somewhere else, a place where no one grows old, and time doesn't work like it does here. They sent me here because they thought I could live like you, but they've changed their minds. They want me back." "But you don't want to go back, do you?" Sarah asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "You want to stay here with us, Adam." "I did," Adam replied sorrowfully, "but if I stay, you'll get hurt. They won't stop." Sarah and Mark exchanged a troubled glance, struggling to decide what to do. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the house worsened. The shadows pressed against the walls, as though trying to force their way inside. Adam began trembling, as if feeling the same oppressive force. Sarah cupped his face, trying to keep him focused. "You're not leaving, Adam. We'll fight for you no matter what it takes." Mark, however, was skeptical. "Sarah, what if fighting for him means we all die? We can't protect him from something we don't understand. You're saying we should hand him over? Abandon him?" Sarah cried, incredulous. "I'm saying this might be bigger than us," Mark snapped, pointing to the encroaching shadows. "Look around. This isn't normal. We can't fight this with love and good intentions." Before they could reach a decision, one of the windows shattered. A shadowy figure entered the house, taking on a vaguely human form but grotesque, with distorted limbs and eyes that glowed like embers. Adam stepped away from Sarah, walking toward the creature. "Adam, no!" Sarah screamed, but he raised his hand, motioning for her to stop. "I'll end this," he said, his voice now deep and resonant, as if another entity were speaking through him. He turned to Sarah and Mark, tears streaming down his face. "I love you, but I can't stay." Before they could stop him, Adam stepped toward the shadow, which enveloped him entirely. Instantly, All the other figures outside vanished. The pressure in the house lifted, and silence fell. Mark and Sarah rushed to where Adam had disappeared, but all that remained was his drawing, now altered. Adam, holding hands with the shadowy figures, walking away. The silence following Adam's departure was nearly unbearable. Sarah and Mark knelt on the living room floor, staring at the drawing, seemingly left as a final message. The house, once full of life and energy with Adam's arrival, now felt empty and oppressively quiet. Sarah clutched the paper to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably, while Mark simply stared into the void, trying to process what had happened. That night, neither of them could sleep. Sarah spent hours in Adam's room, looking at the little things he had left behind, his toys, the children's books she used to read to him at bedtime, and especially a worn teddy bear he always held. Every detail felt like a cruel reminder of his absence. Mark, meanwhile, returned to his study. He reopened an email from a specialist and reread information about the mark of the link. There was something he hadn't noticed before. A footnote mentioning a similar case documented in an ancient manuscript housed in a library specializing in occult texts. Mark saw a glimmer of hope, perhaps a way to bring Adam back. The next morning, Mark shared his idea with Sarah. "There's more we can find out," he said. "If we can locate these manuscripts, maybe we can understand what happened to Adam and how to get him back." Sarah, still in shock from the night before, now had a spark of hope in her eyes. "If there's a chance, any chance, I'll go with you," she said firmly. "I'm not giving up on him." The couple embarked on a journey to the library. It was an old, nearly abandoned building with shelves full of dusty books that seemed untouched for decades. After explaining their search to the librarian, they were led to a restricted room containing a collection of ancient and esoteric texts. After hours of combing through manuscripts, Mark found something. In one of the texts, there was a detailed description of the mark of the link. He read it aloud to Sarah. "Those who bear the mark are chosen to be bridges between dimensions. They possess knowledge and abilities that make them unique, but also place them in danger. Only a specific ritual can break the bonds and allow the chosen one to return to their place of origin, without harming the world to which they were sent." Sarah interrupted. "A ritual? Does that mean there's a way to bring him back?" Mark continued reading. The text described rare ingredients and intricate steps, but the final line was the most alarming. "For the ritual to be performed, one of the earthly guardians must sacrifice themselves." Sarah fell silent, absorbing the weight of those words. Mark tried to argue. "We don't know if this is real. It could just be a myth, a superstition." "But what if it's not?" Sarah retorted, her eyes blazing with determination. "I would do anything to bring Adam back. He's our son, Mark. Our son." Mark hesitated, knowing she was serious. The dilemma was clear now. They could risk everything to try the ritual or accept losing Adam and move on. As they drove home, something strange happened. The road seemed longer than usual. The streetlights flickered, and a thick fog began to envelop the car. Sarah looked at Mark, worried. "This isn't right. This isn't the same road we took before." Mark tried to stay calm, but soon realized the GPS was spinning in circles, unable to pinpoint their location. Then, up ahead, they saw a familiar figure standing in the middle of the road. Adam. Sarah screamed his name, and Mark slammed on the brakes. They jumped out of the car, and there he was, standing there with the same serene expression as always, but something was different about him. His eyes now glowed faintly, as if they held a light of their own. "I don't have much time," Adam said, his voice echoing strangely as though many voices spoke at once. "I came to warn you. Don't try to bring me back. If you do, something far worse will happen." Sarah ran to him, trying to embrace him, but her hands passed right through as if he were made of smoke. "Adam, please, tell me how to help you. We can't live without you." "You've already helped me," Adam said. "You gave me something I never had before. Love. But my place isn't here. And if you try to change that, the consequences will be irreversible." Mark tried to argue. "But why did they take you? "What are you, Adam?" "I'm a link," Adam replied, "and as long as I exist, there's balance. But if you interfere, that balance will be destroyed." Before they could ask more questions, Adam vanished into the fog, leaving only the sound of his voice lingering in the air. Goodbye. Adam's farewell left Sarah and Mark shattered. They returned home in silence, his presence lingering like an invisible weight. Every corner of the house felt full of memories, his laughter, the scent of his shampoo, his drawings scattered across the table. But now, it all seemed empty. Sarah refused to accept Adam's words as final. To her, there was something more they hadn't yet understood. "Mark, you heard what he said, but you also know he's suffering. He shouldn't have to bear this alone. He's just a child," she said, compulsively tidying Adam's room as if he might walk back in at any moment. Mark, however, began retreating into himself. He saw the determination in Sarah's eyes to try again, to find some way to bring Adam back, but the vision of Adam on that road, with his glowing eyes and otherworldly voice, haunted him. "Sarah," he warned us, "what if trying to bring him back unleashes something worse on our world? What if the sacrifice isn't just ours, but countless others? Are you saying we should give up on him?" Sarah shot back, her voice breaking with tears. "Can you really live with that, Mark? Because I can't." That night, as Mark tried to sleep, a noise echoed through the house. It was a low, rhythmic sound, like someone tapping on wood. He got up slowly, following the noise to the living room. There he found Sarah standing, holding one of Adam's drawings. On the floor, she had recreated the symbol of the mark of the link with coarse salt and candles. "What are you doing, Sarah?" Mark asked, his blood running cold. "If you won't help me, I'll do it myself," she replied, without looking at him. "There's a way to bring him back. I found something that doesn't require a sacrifice. He can return to us without consequences. You don't know if this will work. Or worse, what might happen? Adam begged us to stop and you're going against that?" Mark was furious, but also terrified. "I'm his mother, Mark. You can give up on him, but I can't," Sarah yelled, lighting the final candle. Before Mark could stop her, the candles flickered, and the air in the room grew heavy. The symbol on the floor began to glow faintly with a golden light. Mark tried to extinguish the candles, but an invisible force threw him back, as if a barrier had been raised around Sarah. "Adam! If you can hear me, come back to us!" Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "I love you. I won't let you go." For a moment, everything was silent. Then the light within the symbol grew blinding. At its center, a figure began to form. It was Adam, but something was different. He was taller, thinner, and his eyes were no longer green. They were pitch black, endless voids. "Sarah!" Adam's voice echoed through the room, but it was no longer the same. It was cold, like the wind on a winter's night. "You shouldn't have done this." Sarah fell to her knees, confused and terrified. "Adam, it's me, your mom. I just wanted to bring you back." "I warned you," he said, his figure starting to distort as if battling something within. "Now they know where you are. They will come." The shadows returned, this time stronger and more menacing. They emerged from the walls, the floor, and even the brightest corners of the room. Mark, desperate, rushed to pull Sarah out of the circle, but again he was repelled by an invisible force. "Close the ritual, Sarah, now!" Mark shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the whispers and laughter of the shadows surrounding them. Trembling, Sarah tried to extinguish the candles, but it was too late. One of the shadows, larger and darker than the rest, surged into the circle, engulfing Adam's figure. He screamed, a sound that was both human and monstrous. "Forgive me," Adam said with the last of his strength. "I can't come back. You have to let me go." With that, he vanished in a burst of light, and the shadows disappeared as quickly as they had come. The room fell silent once more, but Sarah and Mark knew their lives would never be the same. The aftermath. The days following the ritual were shrouded in silence and pain. Sarah and Mark barely spoke to one another. Both were trapped in their own worlds, dealing with guilt and loss in opposing ways. Sarah spent hours in Adam's room, surrounded by his belongings. while Mark avoided the space entirely, burying himself in work to escape his emotions. But the tension between them couldn't stay buried for long. One evening, as Mark poured himself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, Sarah entered, her eyes red from crying. "Don't you feel anything? Don't you miss him?" she asked, her voice trembling with pain. "Of course I miss him, Sarah," Mark replied, exasperated. "But what do you want me to do? We tried, we did everything we could, and yet he's gone. Dwelling on it won't bring him back." "You gave up on him from the start," Sarah shouted, pointing an accusing finger at him. "You never accepted him as our son. You were always suspicious, always investigating, just waiting for something to go wrong." "Because something was wrong, Sarah, and I was right. Adam wasn't like us, and it put our lives in danger. You can keep denying it, but you know it's true." Mark's words hung in the air, echoing through the kitchen. Sarah stood frozen, tears streaming down her face with a new weight. Without responding, she turned and went upstairs, leaving Mark alone with his guilt and the crushing silence. Signs of change. Despite the growing distance between them, both Sarah and Mark knew they couldn't go on like this. Sarah began seeking support in groups for adoptive parents, hoping to find solace or insight from others with similar experiences. Mark, on the other hand, shifted his focus from what had happened to Adam to how they could cope with the void he left behind. During one of his searches, Mark stumbled upon an article about grief therapy for families who had lost adopted children. He hesitated to bring it up to Sarah, worried she might see it as an attempt to move on from Adam, but he decided to take the risk. One evening, he sat beside her on the couch and handed her the article. "I know things have been hard," he began quietly, "but maybe this could help us. Not to forget Adam, but to figure out how to keep going." Sarah looked at the paper and for the first time in weeks saw a glimmer of sincerity in Mark's eyes. She took the article and nodded slowly. I think we could try. Rebuilding connection. The therapy sessions felt like walking through a minefield of emotions at first. Mark and Sarah had so much to unpack, from Mark's initial suspicions to the ritual that nearly destroyed their family. Their therapist encouraged them to speak openly, and gradually they began to understand each other's perspectives. "I investigated because I was afraid," Mark admitted during one session. "Not just of what Adam was, but of what I wasn't. I never felt ready to be a father, and when things seemed unusual, it gave me an excuse to keep my distance." Sarah wiped her tears as she listened. "And I clung to Adam because he was everything I ever wanted. I was so desperate to be a mum that I ignored the signs, even when they were right in front of me." These moments of vulnerability started to heal the rift between them. Slowly, anger gave way to understanding, and they realized that despite their differences, they shared the same goal: to honor Adam's memory. A new purpose. One day, while organizing Adam's belongings, Sarah found a drawing he had made before he disappeared. It was simple, but deeply meaningful. A picture of himself standing between Mark and Sarah, all holding hands and smiling. Beneath it, in his childlike handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for giving me a family." Sarah and Mark stared at the drawing, tears streaming down their faces. In that moment, they understood that Adam's time with them, no matter how short, had been meaningful, and though he was gone, his love had forever changed their lives. The drawing brought tears to their eyes, but also something new, a sense of peace. Mark and Sarah decided that instead of drowning in their grief, they would use their experience to help other families facing similar challenges. They began actively participating in support groups, sharing their story and listening to others. Sarah also started writing a book about their journey with Adam, not only as a way to honor him, but to help others understand that true love is unconditional, even when faced with things we cannot explain. A new chapter. Over time, Mark and Sarah found a new stability in their relationship. The pain of loss never completely vanished, but it became a part of who they were, a constant reminder of their connection with Adam and the strength they discovered within themselves. Yet something curious happened a year after Adam's departure. One sunny afternoon, while walking through the park, Sarah suddenly stopped. On a bench ahead of them sat a boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to Adam. He was looking at them with that same shy smile. When Mark and Sarah blinked, the boy was gone. They exchanged glances and Sarah whispered, "Did you see that?" Mark nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. Maybe he's telling us he's okay and that he's home. After the park incident, Mark and Sarah's lives began to settle into a rhythm, but the vision of the boy who looked like Adam stirred an unease within them. Not sadness or fear exactly, but a sense of something unfinished. It felt as if Adam was still there, watching over them, or perhaps trying to communicate. This feeling reached its peak one night when Sarah woke to a sound coming from Adam's room. It was faint, like the rustling of paper, but enough to make her get out of bed. "Mark, wake up," she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder. Mark groggily opened his eyes. "What is it?" "There's something in Adam's room. I heard something, like someone's there." Reluctantly, Mark got up. Grabbing a flashlight, he followed Sarah down the hall. Adam's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and a faint light seemed to be emanating from inside. What they saw when they entered left them speechless. Adam's drawings, which had been carefully stored away in a drawer, were scattered across the floor. In the center of the room, Adam's teddy bear sat upright, as though someone had placed it there. Next to the bear was a new drawing they didn't recognize. It was a picture of their house, but with an unsettling detail. Surrounding the house were the same shadows that had tried to take Adam. This time, they were closer. In the center of the house stood a figure resembling Adam, but he was different, taller, with entirely black eyes. Sarah clutched Mark's arm, her breathing quickening. "What does this mean? Is he trying to warn us?" Mark stared at the drawing, a chill running down his spine. Either that or he's asking for our help again. A reborn dilemma. In the days that followed, the couple tried to rationalize what had happened. Sarah was convinced it was a clear sign that Adam was still trapped somewhere, reaching out to their world. "He's asking us to do something," she said, resolute. "We can't ignore this." Mark, however, was more cautious. What if it's another trap? Remember what happened last time we tried to intervene? What if this isn't Adam, but something using him to get to us? The disagreement reignited old tensions. Sarah wanted to take the risk. Mark wanted to protect what remained of their lives. Yet deep down, both knew they couldn't move on without at least trying to understand what was happening. Then, Sarah discovered something hidden at the back of Adam's drawer, a small notebook she had never seen before. Its cover bore the same symbol that had been on Adam's back. Inside were drawings and notes in Adam's childlike handwriting, but the content was far too advanced for a child. "There are two worlds, separated by a line that few can cross," read one page. "Those with the mark are the bridge, but the bridge must remain strong. If it is destroyed, both worlds will collapse." Returning to the unknown. The notebook strengthened Sarah's belief that Adam was trying to warn them about something larger. She insisted they consult the symbolism expert Mark had contacted in the past. Reluctantly, Mark agreed, and they arranged an in-person meeting with Dr. Raymond Carter. Dr. Carter, an older man with a stern demeanor and piercing eyes, listened to their story in silence. He carefully examined the notebook and drawings. When he finished, he closed the notebook and looked at them gravely. "What you have here is rare and dangerous," he said. "The mark of the link isn't just a symbol, it's a bond. Your boy wasn't just a bridge between worlds. He was the balance keeping everything stable. When he was taken, that balance was shattered." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "It means the other side is closing in. If you don't act, the shadows you saw won't just destroy your home, they'll cross into this world completely. And when that happens, there will be no stopping them." The final decision. Dr. Carter explained that there was a way to restore the balance, rebuilding the bond between the worlds. "But it can only be done at the place where the link was broken," he said. "The problem is, it requires a great sacrifice. One of you will have to offer your life to ensure the bridge is rebuilt." Mark and Sarah sat in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of the decision before them. The thought of losing one another was unbearable, yet they knew they couldn't escape the choice that lay ahead. If this means saving Adam and his world, I'll do it, Sarah said firmly, her voice unwavering. No, Sarah, Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. You've already given so much. I'll go. The journey to the place where the ritual would take place was somber and quiet. Dr. Carter guided them along an endless, desolate road. He had explained that the point of rupture, the location where the connection between the worlds had been severed, manifested in isolated areas marked by the presence of the shadows. It was a place where the veil between the two realms was at its thinnest. Mark and Sarah exchanged few words during the drive. The decision had not been revisited since that fateful night, but both knew what it meant. The silence between them wasn't one of indifference, but of understanding, a shared acknowledgement that this was their final journey together. The ritual site. When they arrived, the scene was like something out of a nightmare. A clearing surrounded by gnarled, skeletal trees lay before them. In the center was a large, flat stone that served as a natural altar. Surrounding it were ancient symbols etched into the ground, glowing faintly as though alive. Dr. Carter began preparing for the ritual, carefully placing candles, rune-marked stones, and a vial of dark liquid that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. You must decide who will stay, he said without looking up. Once the ritual begins, there's no turning back. Sarah turned to Mark, her determination shining through her tears. It's going to be me. You need to live, Mark. Someone has to remember him, to tell his story. Mark's hands trembled as he held her face. No, Sarah, I was the one who doubted him the most. I was the one who tried to push him away. If anyone should pay for this, it's me. Dr. Carter's voice cut through their exchange, sharp and urgent. If you don't decide quickly, the shadows will decide for you. The attack of the shadows. Before they could make their choice, the shadows began to emerge, slithering from every corner of the clearing. Larger and more menacing than ever, they moved like predators, circling their prey. Mark and Sarah stood side by side, holding hands, as Dr. Carter muttered incantations in an ancient language. The shadows attacked. Though they weren't solid, their touch brought an unbearable cold that drained their strength. Mark tried to shield Sarah, but he knew they couldn't hold out for long. Then, from the center of the altar, a bright light began to glow. Out of it stepped Adam. He looked just as he had before, but there was something different. An aura of strength and tranquility radiated from him. You can't do this, Adam said, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. It's not right. This sacrifice isn't yours to make. Adam! Sarah cried, rushing toward him, but he raised a hand, stopping her. I came because the connection can still be restored, Adam said, but only if you trust me. You have to let me do what I was meant to do. They want to take you, Adam? Mark shouted, fighting off the icy grip of the shadows. They won't stop until they destroy you. They can't destroy me, Adam replied. I am the bridge, but you have to trust me. You have to let me go. The final choice. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look. Every instinct screamed at them to protect Adam, to bring him back to their world, but his words struck a chord deep within them. Interfering again might destroy everything. Adam, we love you, Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. And we always will. If you believe this is the right thing, we'll trust you. Adam smiled, a bittersweet expression filled with gratitude and sadness. Thank you for loving me. It's what gave me strength. I'll never forget you. He stepped back, fully entering the light on the altar. The shadows recoiled as though repelled by his presence. Adam raised his hands, and the symbols on the ground flared with brilliant light. In a final blinding flash, he vanished, taking the shadows with him after the sacrifice. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. The air was still, and the glowing runes had gone dark. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing, while Mark knelt beside her, wrapping her in his arms. They both knew Adam was gone for good, but this time it wasn't a farewell filled with despair. It was a goodbye marked by peace. Dr. Carter approached, his expression somber yet respectful. You made the right choice. The connection has been restored. He's at peace now, and your world is safe." Mark nodded, holding Sarah tightly. "He will always be our son, and we will always be his family." In the days that followed, life settled into a quiet melancholy. The clearing felt like a distant memory, but the void left by Adam was ever present. Yet the suffocating pain that once accompanied his absence had been replaced by a sense of calm. Mark and Sarah returned home, and for the first time in weeks, they sat down together for a meal. Though they ate in silence, there was an unspoken understanding between them. As Sarah looked across the table, her gaze softened. "We did the right thing, didn't we?" He looked happy, at peace. Mark reached across the table, taking her hand in his, something he hadn't done in a long time. "Yes, we did. And he knew how much we loved him. That's what matters." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "I still feel like he's here somehow, not like before, but as if he's watching over us, taking care of us." Mark smiled for the first time in a long while. Maybe he is, and maybe he always will be. A legacy of love. Months passed, and Sarah found solace in finishing the book she had started before. She poured her heart into it, chronicling their journey, the emotions, the challenges, and how Adam had forever changed their lives. The book wasn't just a tribute to him. It was a message of hope for other families facing unimaginable loss. Mark, who had initially hesitated to revisit the past, eventually joined Sarah in the process. He read her drafts, shared his own memories of Adam, and contributed to the project. It became a healing endeavor for them both. When the book was published, it resonated deeply with readers, offering comfort and inspiration to those who had suffered similar losses. An unexpected sign. One evening, months after the book's release, Sarah and Mark sat in the garden, enjoying the cool night air. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and the moon cast a soft glow over everything. Sarah looked up and noticed something unusual. Among the stars, 3 lights appeared in a formation that seemed oddly familiar. She grasped Mark's hand and pointed. "Mark, look." Mark followed her gaze and saw the lights. They formed the same pattern as the markings on Adam's back, 3 connected circles. They sat in silence, staring at the sky, feeling a wave of warmth and comfort wash over them. Sarah whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. "He's okay. He's telling us he's okay." Mark smiled, pulling Sarah into an embrace, "and that he'll always be with us." Beginning anew, in time, Mark and Sarah decided their journey as parents wasn't over. Not to replace Adam, but to expand the love they had discovered through him. They began the adoption process again, ready to provide a home to another child, now with the knowledge that true love could overcome any barrier, even those between worlds. Adam's memory remained alive, not just in their hearts, but in the legacy of love he had left behind. He wasn't merely a bridge between worlds. He was proof that love could transform even the most mysterious and unexplainable connections. Epilogue. Years later, on a sunny afternoon, Sarah watched as a young girl ran joyfully through their garden. She was full of life and laughter, a child they had adopted 2 years earlier. Clutched tightly in her hands was Adam's old teddy bear, and she seemed to be having a conversation with it as she played. Sarah smiled, her heart full, and for a brief moment she felt a gentle breeze envelop the scene. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Adam, for everything." The breeze seemed to respond, a soft, loving whisper that only Sarah could hear. The story of Sarah, Mark, and Adam is not just a tale of loss and love. It's a profound reflection on the power of the connections that bind us, human or otherwise. It reminds us of the strength love holds, even in the face of the most difficult and inexplicable challenges. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of this family's journey? Have you ever experienced something in life that felt larger than reason or beyond your understanding? Share your reflections, your own stories, or what this narrative meant to you. Stories have the power to connect us, and your perspective could inspire someone else. If this story touched you in any way, consider sharing it with someone you love or someone in need of hope. Love can transcend anything, even the boundaries between worlds. Thank you for joining us on this journey.